guess what I have discovered?
Does it show us things that will be? Or things that only might be?
Ah, I know not. And yet, mayhap the chicken hath such power.
How do I learn to master its power? To fight back against the darkness?
That is an excellent question. And yet, do you think you have the power to master this chicken?
Tell me what I must do.
Many have tried, but only a paltry few have proven themselves worthy. Will you? I think not.
But if I cannot master it, how am I to use it?
Pray tell, this chicken, why would you seek its great and terrible power?
I saw something.
You have but to pluck this chicken from my hands and bear it forth unto battle. And in that day...
Corey! What are you telling him? Don't talk to strangers.
Welcome, dear friends, to episode 6 of Rings and Realms. In this episode, we examine the path of the faithful, explore the choices of the tempted, and ponder the motivations of the power-hungry.
We're so glad everybody seems to be enjoying this thing that we're doing here. Your comments, your engagement, the laughs and encouragement, it's really soul-feeding. We're loving making this show as much as you enjoy consuming it.
Thanks especially to our backers at Kickstarter and in our community on our exclusive Discord. Your questions are thoughtful, honest, and even brave. And your enthusiasm during filming and episode dropping is unmatched.
And you can still pledge if you'd like to pledge. It's just a few weeks until we film our retrospective episode, and we have a lot of folks lined up for that, including Matt from Nerd of the Rings, Kirsten from OneRing.net, and Alan from the Prancing Pony podcast and the Rings of Power wrap-up, who is also our Q&A guest for today.
We'll also have a number of the cast and team from the Rings of Power in the coming weeks, and at the retrospective, so there's a lot to look forward to. Unfortunately, we were hoping to have Elendil with us today to talk about this episode. He had to reschedule. We thought he'd had time on his hands because he'd be either in prison or dead, but now he's managing the Queen of the Sea's busy social calendar, so we had to reschedule, but we hope to get him soon.
So for now, we have a lot of segments to get through. There was a lot going on there.
There's so much.
You ready?
Let's do it.
I want to take a look at Elendil and Miriel's encounter with the sea worm for a minute, because it was quite the scene. It's a gorgeous day in Numenor, the sun is shining, it's a bright new day as our drone shot spins around to trumpets blaring. But alas, things are not quite so nice in reality. We soon learn that this is a sacrificial spot. It's a testing ground for the faithful. I think the choice of daybreak is quite significant here because it feels like a fresh start. There's quite a few allusions in here to a rebirth, a baptism of sorts. We see Miriel in all white, her hair is down, and she is unmade. She's pure. She comes across as faithful. She uses the Quenya word for goodbye or farewell, which Corey will discuss at length in the next section, but it's calm. It feels like a reassurance to Elendil. She's comfortable taking this step as one of the faithful. We then see her descend. into the other world physically and symbolically, moving lower in the ceremonial space as the camera pans back, showing us just how deep down she has to go, all those steps down to Numenor's foundations and to her own. These subsequent shots are pretty neat in how they convey the space and perspective. We have this really wide shot of the sea where we can see the disturbed water way out there and the monster way out there stirring up that water. The vastness and the monster together are huge. It is daunting and overwhelming. The ripple in the water disappears, signifying that the monster has gone underwater. It's coming closer, and the camera pulls back like we are retreating. We're backing up toward Muriel in the pool, and we see the rocks enter the foreground, almost from her perspective. It feels defensive, like we're backing away from the danger. Then the camera flies up over the water, and it pans up onto her eyes, almost like the monster swimming towards her, bringing us closer to her from its perspective. But she isn't retreating. She's anticipating something, but she is resolute, determined. We then have a pause and an extreme close-up of her face, and the camera dips underwater. We are at risk with her. The suspense is increasing. Then when she's snatched underwater, she's in a beam of light. She's wearing white clothing that trails into the water, but she is calm, upright, and again resolute in the face of this monster. She really looks quite holy in this moment. The camera then cuts back and forth from her underwater to the crowd above. And by showing us their perspective, the crowd, we can see what they can see. We understand their stress, the uncertainty and the painful second-by-second count as time passes. Hope for the faithful that she'll return soon, which would spell devastation for the king and his men, or if she doesn't return, the judgment of the Valar shown to the faithful, and Pharazôn's reign would be confirmed. Their stress is palpable. The camera cranes up, zooming out higher over the pool, and we can see the bottom of it and not see Muriel. It starts to feel like a soul is departing from that pool. We start to fear the worst. But just then they shout out, "The Valar have deemed her!" and she's hurled back out of the sea. Excellent timing for the sea worm. Deemed innocent, and all hail Queen Muriel. She lies anew, Queen of the Sea, Tar Miriel, and Elendil righteously escorts her out of the depths and back to her rightful place. We also see the citizens of Numenor in this shot on every hillside, ensuring that they also witnessed this test. This climactic shift in Muriel and Elendil's trajectory works through this sea worm test. It's like a storytelling conduit, an ancient test, a cocky king, the faithful staying the course, and then these visual and filmic cues taking us on that journey. It makes sense getting from A to B. They started as outcasts, they return reborn as righteous heroes in just over 5 minutes of screen time. Very well played.
As we soar above the dome of the Palace of Numenor, we pause over a top view of the prow, looking down on the circle of the white tree, looking up at us like the iris of Numenor's eye. It's a beautiful shot. As the camera lingers on the white tree, we should remember its significance. The white tree is the living connection of the Numenoreans to the west, to the elves and the Valar. This is the whole thing, right? It's just like the tree in Lindon being a living connection of the elves back to Valinor, emphasized when the tree glows with radiant light, and also like Durin's tree being the living connection between him and his friend Elrond. The white tree played a pivotal moment in Season 1, you'll remember, its petals falling, calling Muriel back to the path of the faithful, the tears of the Valar, to remind the Numenoreans that the eyes of the Valar are upon them. Now, with the tree looking like the white iris of an enormous divine eye, we're reminded of this. And while we are looking at this, we hear our Pharazôn declaim, "Outlawry!" I love the juxtaposition, the really subtle foreshadowing. It's, funny Pharazôn should mention outlawry. The dramatic irony is kind of intense. Also funny he should mention the indictment he's building up to, high treason. How high, exactly, one is tempted to ask. But anyway, we are in the Great Hall in the palace, and this is Elendil's trial, not yet Pharazôn's. The crowd reactions here give us a good sense of where we are in Numenor's political progress. Sentiment runs strongly in favor of our Pharazôn. We are almost all good kingsmen here. We do get glimpses, though, of some faithful in the crowd. Nothing like a majority, and very restrained or even secretive when it comes to sharing their views, but they're present. This episode, which starts by teasing our Pharazôn's future crimes against the Valar, does a lot to establish our Pharazôn's current position. Politically, he's fairly secure. though the faithful are still a concern. His idiot son Kemen has, in Ar-Pharazôn's opinion, already done enough to help that situation. By the way, you know what finally occurred to me this week? Remember how last week I said that Kemen represents the King's Men as a group? That he is clearly their representative in this story, just as Elendil was the representative of the persecuted faithful? Well, this week I realized that Kemen is literally the King's Men. He's the K-Men. Kemen. He's exactly what it reads on the tin. I can't believe it took me so long to notice that. Anyway, Ar-Pharazôn needs the King's Men, those who are dedicated to the new Numenor and willing to do whatever he needs, but he's not so secure that he really wants to go around antagonizing the faithful and making martyrs for their cause. Whatever happens to Ar-Pharazôn in this episode, remember that it's all Kemen's fault. I bet Pharazôn will. Anyway, Elendil's refusal to admit his treason and swear fealty creates a problem. Now Ar-Pharazôn has no choice but to make another martyr, and a really high-profile one. There is no good solution to this problem. Elendil's actions are going to increase the awkward faithful demographic, and things are likely to get really sticky. This leads Belzegar, his evil toady, to a brilliant solution. Instead of persecuting the faithful for following the old ways and outlawing that, let's exploit it. Let's execute Elendil by way of the trial by abyss. That seems safe. We'll not only appease the faithful, but we will checkmate them. Elendil dies, and then they, the faithful, have to say that, according to their own beliefs, the Valar have told them that defying Ar-Pharazôn is wrong. Or, alternatively, they have to admit that their old beliefs are actually a sham and a pretense, in which case they aren't really the faithful anymore, just political dissidents. I mean, it's actually kind of a brilliant plan, politically. There's only one way it can go wrong, if there actually were, like, some kind of miracle. Ar-Pharazôn does not really seem to entertain this as a possibility. There seems an underlying foundation of skepticism in the entire plan. Note, though, I don't think that anyone, Ar-Pharazôn, Belzegar, or even Kemen, have made speeches that are actually, like, atheistic or skeptical of the existence of the Valar. I've gotten the impression that when he talks about the Valar, Ar-Pharazôn is doing lip service and doesn't really believe it, while he focuses instead on the daily political realities of Numenor. But I don't remember that we have clear evidence that he disbelieves in the Valar themselves. I think we can see this in the trial by abyss itself. They're not skeptical of the framework. They believe in the worm and that it will come. They believe, so far as I can tell, in the Valar. But they don't seem to think that the Valar are going to act, that the deliverance will come. Of course, the trial by abyss backfires spectacularly on Ar-Pharazôn. Notice carefully the position that this puts him in. Politically, of course, it is a disaster. The people are totally won over, and they all believe Miriel is now the chosen one. That's a problem. But that's not the position I'm talking about. Ar-Pharazôn is good at the political side. He'll get around the Miriel problem. I have a shrewd idea how he's going to do it. But what I mean is that we should notice the position that Ar-Pharazôn is put in with relation to the Valar themselves. He has now received what he will have to accept as evidence that the Valar are in fact paying attention, that their eyes are indeed on Numenor, and they are interfering actively. And they are his enemies, working to promote his rivals and make him look like a fool. He has never actually defied the Valar yet. That may soon change. Now, Elendil endures a painful series of tests in this episode. His first test is his first public trial. He is being asked to choose between his integrity and death. This is simple, but not easy, and I think that Lloyd Owen does a great acting job here and elsewhere in this episode. He is asked to renounce his crimes, and he does it, which I loved. After all, remember, he does have stuff to be ashamed of in this episode. He decked Kemen. Now, much as that might seem an act of virtue, it is not the path of the faithful, and even he would consider it a crime, for in doing it he broke his queen's command. But of course, he isn't going to swear fealty to Ar-Pharazôn. Again, this isn't easy, but it's simple. The bad news is that this is the first and the easiest of Elendil's tests. His second test is Aarian's visit in prison. Here he is being asked to choose between his integrity and his daughter's love. Note, he is not choosing between his own love for his daughter and his integrity. His joy at holding his daughter in his arms again. Let me just say that there are only a few moments in this show that have made me tear up, and most of them have involved Elendil's paternal hugs. Elendil shows his love, but still stands strong. His third test is Muriel's trial. This one is the worst. His choice between his integrity and his love, who is also the focal point of his integrity. I will note in passing Eärion's unwholesome interest in the signs of physical affection between Elendil and Muriel in the cell. Paging Dr. Freud, but seriously, I have a bad feeling about those intent glances of hers. When she becomes a Nazgul, she's never going to let him live that down. Anyway, Elendil's third test comes in two parts, the hard part and the really hard part. Right? The hard part is crushing the spirits of the woman you love and respect and have sworn fealty to. The really hard part is standing by and watching that woman die in your place. Elendil has really been through the crucible here. Through it all, he kept his integrity and his humanity both. This is the path of the faithful. I just love this. And then somehow it gets even better. Muriel steps up and leads the way. If we must walk the path of the faithful, it must be me who takes the first step, she says. Muriel cracked in the jail cell, commanding Elendil to swear to Pharazôn to save his own life. Just like Elendil cracked by punching Kemen in his pimply face. Notice, though, that now she is taking the lead. She is saving the man she loves from death, yes, but that's not why she's doing it. Her love for Elendil led her to stumble before in their conversation in the prison. Now she's being a leader. Muriel's political instincts, her leadership is impeccable. From the angry mother at the king's funeral to the mob at the coronation, and culminating in the moment of her offering herself as a sacrifice, she does everything perfectly. She is a phenomenal queen and the perfect model of the faithful. The path of the faithful, if they stay on it and don't play politics or rebel, is a winner. She steps out in trust, putting the entire question of her legitimacy as queen in the hands of the Valar. She is right that that is really what the trial was always about. And the Valar speak, and her enemies are confounded. The image of her stepping in blind trust down into the pool of her own will is so beautiful. Like Bilbo, she takes a leap in the dark. In the end, she is declared innocent, even by the Weasley Belzegar. Innocent of treason, presumably, as that's what was at issue with Elendil. She has been chosen by the Valar. They kind of already delivered that memo when the eagle showed up at her septrification. Now, no one can mistake it. She is the queen of the sea, Elendil says. I'm not sure how to parse that entirely. I'm going to hold off on that one until we see more of the aftermath, and especially her own reflections on the title. This scene, of course, is the other big Bible reference that I mentioned before. The queen is Jonah. She is even vomited up by the fish onto the shore. Brief explanation. Jonah is one of the Hebrew prophets who is given a job by God. Jonah is supposed to travel to the biggest, most advanced, and most hostile city in the world and tell them to repent before God smites them. He wants no part of this, so he gets in a boat going in the opposite direction, but he realizes he went on the wrong path when he is struck by a storm at sea. He gets thrown out of the boat and swallowed by a sea monster, which is definitely not a whale, by the way, who carried him to Nineveh and spits him up on the shore, where he finally gets to doing his job. There are lots of parallels here, of course. Muriel's resistance to her father's faithful path, which got him semi-deposed, leading to her deciding against Galadriel originally. She goes on a sea journey. She had a life-changing event in a storm. Well, a volcanic eruption, but it was close. And now she's been swallowed and spat up by a sea monster. Oh, and when she is barfed up on the shore, the great, mighty, and hostile city repents. Muriel is now clearly a prophetic figure. So, what does all this say about the sea worm? Well, this whole sequence suggests very strongly that it is a servant and instrument of the Valar. And more, it is not just a dumb beast, manipulated somehow by the Valar. It is sentient. It looks into Muriel's eyes and makes a decision, actually seeming to weigh her innocence or guilt. Again, the eye connection is ironic. The knowing eyes of the worm and the blind eyes of the queen. She has no idea what's happening. The evaluation is all going in one direction. This in turn brings me back to two other things. Halbrand in the sea confronting the worm, back in episode 1. Many responded to that scene by imagining that Sauron was controlling the worm. I rather doubt that now. It seems likely to be aversion rather than obedience, which leads the worm to turn away. Go back and watch that scene again. Notice how the worm shakes its head after it turns away from Sauron. Totally different reaction, totally different move for Miriel. Even the worm's not getting Halbrand's raft and eating the other people instead seems less like it's following his instructions and more like it wanting nothing further to do with the unsanitary spaghetti monster on raft number 2. Second, it brings me back to the bizarre aquatic explosion that disrupted Círdan and saved the three. At the time, you will recall, I rejected the idea that it was a message sent by the Valar, and I suggested the sea worm is a likely candidate for causing the disruption. Since I still think that latter is so, I now have to reconsider the whole message of the Valar angle. I don't get it, but I have to consider it, certainly. A final note on Ar-Pharazôn and the Palantir. At the end of the episode, Ar-Pharazôn is a little desperate. He was staring at the Palantir before. Now he takes the step. Why does he do this? What is he hoping to find? The Palantir was associated with elf friendship. It was politically toxic earlier. Yet he was clearly drawn to it. Was he driven by self-doubt? Was he hoping to spy on the enemy? What he sees when he puts his hand on it is the caldera of Mount Doom, just like the stranger saw. Then Mount Doom from afar, reflected in the eye of presumably Sauron, with a lightning flash, and then Halbrand as he was in Numenor at the forge. So he has seen the identity of Sauron, and knows he was there in Numenor, and he met him. And he knows he is building power. And the lightning flash, that is the coolest of all. It's an allusion forward, I believe, to the most metal moment of Sauron's future career in Numenor. I love it. We'll talk about it more later, like in a few years. I can't wait to see what Pharazôn himself is going to make of this vision.
Right, so do you guys remember that iconic scene last season with Adar chained up in the barn and Galadriel was interrogating him? Well, we are introduced to the Dutch angle there, also called the canted or oblique angle. It's most commonly the Dutch angle as it was used forever in German and Dutch cinema in like the 1920s, so it's like coined that term, but you might hear any of those other terms talking about it. It's a really disorienting shot. It marks like an uneasy psychological state. It sets us to this feeling of tension in the scene, and it's akin to like distrust and uncertainty. Well, in episode 6, we get this again. A lot. But this time the tables are turned. Galadriel is captive in Adar's space, and instead of enemies, he is proposing that they be allies. Talk about disconcerting. This whole scene, and their scene that follows towards the end of the episode, could be subtitled An Exercise in Angles and Light. So, let's take a look at this scene. There's a lot going on that's fun to investigate, and I don't think any of it is accidental. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. It should generally be assumed that everything in a film or TV series like this is purposeful. Maybe it doesn't always have a meaning. I mean, we can't give every single film crew that kind of credit. So much of it depends on the director and the cinematographer and intent, but the general idea there will always be that there's a reason or a meaning behind the shot, because loads of decisions need to be made before action is ever yelled. Lighting creates a mood, camera angle creates a feeling, frame composition and understanding of that scene, and everything together tells the story of what's happening. Even our lighting elements here at Studio Lab takes ages, technically and artistically, to set this up. None of this is happenstance or accidental. So let's take a look at what we do see and what it might be telling us in this scene. So we open on this scene already in a Dutch angle. We are immediately off kilter and not at ease at all with the situation as Adar's hand stabs the food on his plate, menacingly gripping a knife. He's on the left side of the frame in this shot, down low, with the right side of the frame pointed up. Then we have a medium-close square shot with Galadriel in the foreground, but she's fuzzy and dark. She's not really clear to us yet. The table is laden with food that is edible, but it's like grilled animal carcasses. It's just a little bit off-putting. And Adar is facing us dead center. Then we travel over the table spread with food and pan up, square on Galadriel. We can't quite tell if she's restrained here or just uncomfortable, but either way, she's not in a position of ease. She's also smack in the middle of two light sources, the sunlight and the fire. Hang on to that, it's important. Then we're given the Dutch angle again. We go back and forth between Galadriel and Adar. Adar is left side down, and nothing in this shot gives us a reference point for being level. The chair is wonky. The ceiling is ramshackle. These guys do not own a spirit level, so we can't get a firm hold here on anything where we're supposed to be. His angle, while the same nearly 45-degree tilt, yes, I measured, feels less intense than hers, and I think this is due to the light framing her, spilling light over her and amplifying her angle. So she's off, and he's off, but she feels jarringly off, like all sorts of out of kilter. They banter a bit, and when Galadriel speaks up, it's a mild down tilt on her and an up tilt on him. A slight power play here, while still in a Dutch angle, before we return to a medium close square shot. Stay with me. Then we have an incredibly slow tightening of the shot, like it's slowly sucking her in, and he talks about Sauron's power. Adar is very much in the shadow here, and Galadriel is mostly in the light, although that is broken up by the coverings on the ceiling. On the line irresistible power, it goes back on him, the tilt still in place, and his gauntleted left hand is by his head, strongly in shot. Perhaps this is another reference to the evil left hand, but it clearly throws us off balance again. Then the camera holds even, medium close square shots and no camera movements in or out. Galadriel admits that everything else after touching Sauron's power is just a dull gray. It's a moment of recognition in each other. I see what you see. We agree. Then we're back at a Dutch angle for the line, I care not. Yeah, I don't believe you when you say it like that, and it looks like this. We are thrown off kilter again, meaning we can't trust what you're seeing. We stay here until he proposes their alliance, which is done through a medium close square shot, a chance for us to right ourselves. But no, because the next shot is a box with a crown in it, and the box is askew. The crown is at all sorts of angles, and nothing here rights us. We're sent back into disarray. Then, as Adar removes the crown from the box, we have a few interesting visuals. We see his elven sword leaning against the large throne-like chair, and then we see the crown, which is reflecting the firelight. It's shining on the left side of the three spikes, and it almost looks like it's glowing from within. Menacing, molten, red fire. It is of the fire here. Galadriel recoils from it. She's clearly feeling that power, and she appears threatened or intimidated by it, but it's the first time she's nearly fully bathed in light. The right side of her face now has a strong beam of light on it, and the left does have a soft glow of firelight, highlighting her two choices here. Align with Adar or not? We come in a bit closer, and the half and half divide gets even clearer. His words cajoling her into believing that she is the key to Sauron's demise, as he admits that he couldn't defeat him before because I didn't have you, he says. Clearly she is framed here in half and half. We then see the slight reasoning behind this. We understand why it makes sense to him. He explains it, and we also get this great shot while Adar shares his reasoning. Galadriel takes up the majority of the right third of the frame. She's in the forefront, but she's out of focus. Whereas he is dead center in focus and the only solid thing in that shot. He is the center line. As for the rest of the frame, once again, we don't have a single straight line anywhere. There's a curved ceiling covered by haphazard sacks which let in broken light. The poles and the torches in the back are all at odd angles, and her chair doesn't have a straight line or a finished edge to it. As they inch towards the climax of this scene, Adar steps into the firelight. The flame is on half of his face, and broken light on the other as he says, Halbrand is Sauron. Then he comes down to her level. She's a bit above him in the foreground but out of focus, and Adar is dead center with the gleaming crown, as if they are a duo proposing this alliance. This is also where we get a lovely shot of the chicken and pickles, which Corey's going to explain in the next bit. He appeals to her humanitarian side here. The fate of the city resides in you. Put aside your pride if you can. These are difficult words to refute, as continuing on her current path in this presentation would equal a selfish and harmful act, really counter to an elf's MO. The crown at this point is glowing, but importantly, it's nearly all silver, all white light from the sun, and hardly reflecting the fire anywhere, even though there's clearly firelight reflecting off the nearby items, like the chicken and the pickles. It's nearly center in the shot, stealing focus. This choice is starting to look rational to Galadriel, and our visual cues are reinforcing that. He removes the crown and locks her up with the weakest lock in existence, so we can kind of assume that he's not really that worried about containing her. Then, when we see them again later in this episode, Galadriel has decided to disclose her knowledge. Yes, Sauron is Halbrand. There's white sunlight on one side of her face and warm firelight on the other. Then we have a very cool camera moment. Galadriel has seemingly decided to align with Adar. She's sharing information, and she says, that gives us a momentary advantage. And she's straight on, medium close-up shot with no angle. When it cuts to Adar, he is in a Dutch angle. This makes us stop. Wait, I thought he wanted her to join him. Is that not what we thought? So just as she decides she could align with him, the Dutch angle is reintroduced. She's squared in the frame and commands him to unlock her, and he's still slightly askew as she continues to disclose current movements and plans around Middle-earth, including the location of her ring. She rises, calls him Uruk, all through squared shots, but he remains in Dutch angle, when he is the only one in frame and he inquires about the fate of his children. He says the shadow has not only overcome you, and now we see that there is no daylight in the scene. It is only firelight now. And the shadow from Adar himself is cast over Galadriel's face. Then the Dutch angle is gone. Galadriel says, you hope I'll reveal something, and he says, you've already revealed everything, the ruse is over. He's in a squared medium close shot, and the veil, so to speak, is lifted. Galadriel was given a choice. She chose, and now she is in the fire and shadow of that decision as he chases her out and reveals his army. Now that you've confirmed it all, Eregion and Sauron will fall. She realizes Sauron's intentions, tries to deter Adar from giving Sauron his army, and she's restrained once again, powerless, and probably again traumatized by her decisions.
Galadriel and Adar's conversation, this time on his turf and with her chained up instead of him, is clearly building on the discussion they had in episode 6 of last season. As Maggie has discussed, the camera angles and lighting in this scene are intense. The Dutch angles recall the last scene, but increase the stakes, adding whole new dimensions. I could spend a long time discussing this scene, almost frame by frame. Maggie and Ben and I did spend like an hour doing that when we first watched it together. Galadriel, whose Dutch angle starts off in the opposite direction from Adar's, clearly wants to distance herself at the beginning from Adar and everything about him, even his quite impressive dinner buffet. He's trying to establish common ground in their victimizations by Sauron, but she points out that she resisted him while Adar submitted. But this is illusion, and she knows it in her heart. Adar's words describe a hauntingly familiar experience for Galadriel, and she cannot deny that he does understand that they have in fact had the same experience. Soon, the two of them are sharing in their own little Sauron manipulation victim support group. Galadriel makes a fascinating confession at this stage. Adar asks what Sauron promised her, and she says an army. Now remember, in Season 1, the army was totally her idea, and one that she forced on Halbrand, or seemed to anyway. Remember her being all like, leave the army to me, and all those slow-mo shots of her in her Joan of Arc armor getting onto the ship with her Numenorean army and being all, I totally delivered an army, didn't I, Halbrand? Well, now, in retrospect, she feels that the army at her back was something that Sauron promised to her, and that it was his idea planted in her head, as Adar describes. Or perhaps, and this seems more likely to me, she is remembering Elrond's cutting but accurate commentary back in Lindon, when she said then that Sauron played her like a harp to a melody not of her choosing. Elrond says that it was entirely of her choosing, that Sauron looked inside and plucked out the notes of her heart, note by note. Was it her plan? Was it Sauron's plan? Is there a difference? Note that Adar says that Sauron promised him children. We should not forget to notice, as neither of them seems to at the moment, that they're having this conversation in the middle of an army rallied to oppose Sauron consisting of Adar's children. They have neither of them let go of Sauron's promises, though they both resist. Having established this connection with Adar, though, Galadriel pulls back from an actual alliance. Is it possible she's wrong? Could this dinner be a chance meeting leading to an unexpected alliance? Would that be a good idea? I couldn't help but notice a little Easter egg on the table. Right in front of Galadriel on the dinner table is a cold chicken, you can tell by the skin that it's cold, and a plate of pickles. Cold chicken and pickles is what Gandalf ordered at the party in Bilbo's house in the first chapter of The Hobbit. Surely this isn't the beginning of an unlikely adventure, is it? Anyway, Adar asks if Galadriel is going to set aside her pride and take his help. We've already heard Eärien talk about setting aside pride, and pride seems to be at issue with Mr. I need to master the secret fire out in Rhûn too. Surely some humility from Galadriel would be good, especially since her pride and following her own way clearly led her into some difficulties last season. But when Adar comes at her with Morgoth's crown, the situation changes. This seems clearly to be a temptation. There seems to be power in the crown, associated with Morgoth's power to dominate. By the way, yes, I know what most of you are thinking about the crown turning out to be Morgoth's own crown. That's impossible. We'll talk about that later. I want to focus on the role the crown plays in this moment. On the surface of it, the crown of Morgoth is an obvious temptation. Hey, let's use an artifact symbolic of, and apparently instilled with, Morgoth's own evil will to dominate the world as a means to a good end. What could go wrong? Adar's plan, on its own merits, is plausible enough. The crown can take him down, but it can't destroy him completely. But the crown and the rings can do the trick. Why would Adar think that? He asks if the rings saved her kind from fading, and she confirms it. This, of course, correlates with the healing of the tree. The causal link between which and the fading has never been explained overtly in the show. But remember what happened when the tree was healed? The black spaghetti tendrils of corruption on the tree turned red as if glowing with fire, then burned away, restoring the life to the tree. So, he reduces Sauron to goo again with the crown, and then Galadriel torches the goo with the ring, which has been proven to work on evil black spaghetti strands. Sounds like a legit plan in one sense. Except for, the whole let's use the evil power of Morgoth to achieve a good end part of the plan. Despite this little pitfall, Galadriel seems later to have decided to put her pride aside. Instead of scornfully calling Adar Orc, as she had all last season and through the first half of their conversation in this episode, she addresses him as Uruk, as he is asked. It's a small concession, but immediately gets Adar's attention. Orc and Uruk are synonyms, translations. The difference is that Uruk is black speech, the Orc's own language. In addressing him as Uruk, she is finally taking the step he's been insisting on, acknowledging his language and implicitly his children as a separate people unto themselves, not just a twisted construction. Adar pushes, asking hard questions about his children and their culture and their land. Will Gil-galad, the High King, allow them to return peacefully to Mordor, or will he invade? This is a legitimately thorny problem. Galadriel's will, however, is firmly engaged on the collaboration now. The end of Galadriel's story in this episode is really painful to watch. First, Adar reveals his manipulation. He doesn't actually want her, only her ring. He has deceived her, using her own post-Sauron manipulation vulnerability against her. She has given the bad guys just what they needed. Again. If the bad guys win, it'll be all her fault. Squared. The horrible dread and self-loathing that crosses her face is really hard to watch while that's being revealed. Let me say, I am officially ready for things to start going right for Galadriel, and for her to stop screwing everything up. Maybe she's going to get a little help from her husband next season. Finding Celebrimbor is really alive could be the big turning point for her, perhaps. I have to say, having Celebrimbor there to help her through all the trauma makes good sense to me as a story. But wait, there's more. After the first horrible reveal that she's done it again and her humility and trust have been exploited once more, there is still another shock remaining. This is the realization that Adar too has been tricked. All season long, Galadriel has been saying, "This is Sauron's doing," when she sees something amiss. And she keeps saying, "That's what Sauron wants," when she is frustrated with people's choices. But now we have the horrible conviction that she's exactly correct. Adar has done Sauron's will by assembling this army for him. Even Adar has a moment of unease as the truth of Galadriel's words hits him, but he chooses to move forward and play it out to defeat Sauron anyway. But remember how both of their dreams were made true by Sauron. She wanted an army, and he wanted children. And now Adar's children have been brought together to fight against Sauron for their freedom, so that Sauron can make them his slaves. Galadriel has been given an army with which to fight against Sauron, and it will become his army with which he will seek to destroy the elves. They are both still Sauron's collaborators. In the last episode, we saw the beginning of King Durin's decline. This episode, we are immediately presented with the further evidence of it. Dwarves are hard at work everywhere, and that in itself isn't too alarming. The first thing we can notice, though, when we look closely, is that the dwarves are not just digging in mines. They're delving through finished rock in a corridor. The neat and orderly beauty of the Khazad-dûm that so struck Elrond when he first saw it in Season 1 is taking a beating. Worse still, we see what is apparently the results of all this destructive mining. Wheelbarrows of gold coins and cups and gems that are being simply heaped before the throne of the king. King Durin is now apparently gathering a horde like a dragon, and indeed we see him on his throne flanked by heaps of more gold. The priorities of Khazad-dûm have gone astray, and those of the king most of all. The disregard for their mountain home and the tribute taken from his people, which we first heard about in the market in episode 5, are equally alarming signs. Prince Durin challenges his father about the ring. The prince doesn't bring up any of the symptoms or try to shame his father or for his actions. He's tried that in episode 5, and it didn't work at all. He does ask his father if he's gone mad, and the king just keeps escalating the creepy, selfish, unprincipled profiteering talk, speaking of gripping the whole world by the throat. Durin goes right for his father's relationship with the ring itself, challenging him to take it off. He doesn't demand the ring or ask his father to dispose of it, just take it off. He is testing his father's degree of addiction to the ring, much like Gandalf does with Frodo in Chapter 2 of the Fellowship of the Ring. The king starts immediately using language that will be familiar to Tolkien fans, saying that the ring is his and belongs to him. The prince, again with wisdom and gentleness, doesn't try to argue. He says with palpable sadness, only that the king is wrong and that his father belongs to the ring. The king's long consideration of his son's moving appeal suggests that his own heart is open to it, to putting off the ring, and perhaps even that he might long to be rid of it. The pattern of both loving and hating a ring of power is well established in the book. But the high-pitched sounds in the background suggest that the power of the ring is at work in his mind, and he refuses and turns away. Prince Durin's frustration and fear for his father's life then overcomes his wisdom, and he tries to take the ring from the king, clearly feeling that a direct physical intervention is the only hope. The king's magically enhanced strike against his son hints at the power that the ring will give him in anger and retribution against those that thwart him, which is pretty ominous. The prince is completely stunned and betrayed, lying on the ground in fear, overcome by helplessness and betrayal. As bad as things are getting in Khazad-dûm, they could still get much worse, even without something nasty emerging from the basement. Disa's passionate appeal for action, for working to thwart the king and to show the people that he is no longer worthy of his throne, is perfectly justified. We can also perceive some irony here. At the end of Season 1, remember, Prince Durin got angry and shouted at his father that he profaned the crown he wears. Since then, the prince has come to see that he was wrong when he said that, and that the king was wise in his refusal of Elrond's request. But now that he is actively collaborating with the elves, following Prince Durin's own original vision, as the king jovially reminded him in episode 5, King Durin actually is profaning his crown. Disa's angry words are not wrong, but they are checked first by her husband's cautions, and then still more by his tears. Durin's emphasis is not on the crimes of the king, but on the sufferings of the old dwarf within. The prince perceived in their earlier conversation a clear separation between the king's mind and heart on the one hand, and the power of the ring on the other hand. Durin doesn't seek to excuse his father, and he doesn't claim he's an innocent victim. But a victim he perceives him to be, a victim of an outside power too great for his own will to overcome completely. He clearly sees the king as needing not to be deposed or brought low, but freed. Durin's pity for his father is a great sign. What's the opposite of a red flag? A green flag? Whatever it is, this is one. Disa's anger is cooled by it, though her resolve doesn't waver. The scene is a beautiful one of this rather wonderful married couple completing each other. Disa's fire breaks through the frozen stasis we can see Durin in as he watches his father, and still more as he stares in shock at the ceiling after being knocked across the room. Durin's compassion tempers Disa's fury and leads her into forms of resistance that will not be simply destructive. The act of resistance that we see thereafter is a beautiful example. Disa stands against the poor, long-suffering Narvi, who is faithfully doing his king's misguided bidding. Notice, though, that this scene brings back an idea we have been tracking throughout the season, the relationship between the dwarves and the mountain. When they find Disa standing in front of the wall, which is the intended victim of their delving violence, she looks like a piece of the mountain itself. Her cloak looks just like the rock wall, and her hair like one of the pockets of shadow we see. Disa is at one with the mountain again. She calls out to the mountain, and for the first time in Season 2, the mountain apparently responds. The swarm of cave bats that drives away Narvi and the miners is like the mountain itself striking out against them. Not lethally, but firmly. The miners themselves don't understand. They laugh at Disa and her singing. Their laughter, however, shows how out of touch they themselves are. The king's rapid and expansive delving has brought about a dulling of the dwarves' connection to the mountain at all. Disa teaches them respect for the mountain once more. Durin's hearty expression of affection for his wife, his joyful approval of and respect for her actions is awesome, and it shows their oneness in this new course. They are on the right road and acting right, in harmony with the mountain and with each other. This is the way. But we can't overlook Anatar's visit, of course. I will mainly point out what we don't see and are not told about Anatar and his relationship with the dwarf king, who is proudly wearing his ring of power. When the scene starts, Prince Durin has just arrived, but Anatar is already there. He and the king were already having some conversation, apparently, but we don't know anything of what they said. Well, that's not true. Apparently, Adar expressed a desire to see Prince Durin for some reason, since the king says it was Anatar who summoned him. If Anatar was wanting to see for himself how much Prince Durin was onto him, he's probably not leaving in much doubt of that. The sauce that Durin offers to Anatar this season has made him my absolute hero. We should certainly share the prince's alarm at the implication that Anatar is giving orders in King Durin's halls, even to his family members. That implication, of course, seems to make it even more likely that the king and the visiting dignitary from Eregion have been having some kind of intimate chat before the prince arrives. This suspicion is surely deepened at the end of the episode. At the time, the king seems to refuse Anatar. Anatar asks for Mithril, and the king says no. The refusal is a delightful surprise to the prince, who feared that his father was falling completely under the domination of this Anatar guy, whom Prince Durin so strongly dislikes. But it looks like the king is proving harder to dominate than perhaps Sauron hoped. Nevertheless, at the end of the episode, Anatar has the Mithril he came to get. How did he get it? Did he in fact return, as King Durin predicted, with a better offer? Did he swipe it when he was there? Did the king actually sell it to him before the prince arrived, and the apparent refusal was only a show? It's not clear, and the doubt we are left in is important. The king is far gone, but we don't really know how far he is under the control of Sauron. One last note we can't skip entirely. The very brief interlude when Anatar turns aside to the burning torch and sees the mini Balrog in the flames. What exactly is going on there? Is Anatar seeing a vision in the fire? Is one of the results of his personal visit to Khazad-dûm a new awareness of just what lies beneath the dwarves' mountain? Did he just discover the Balrog or his identity? Or is there a possibility he's actually communicating with the Balrog? Lie low for a while, dude, and then pounce when I give the word. Or is it possible that the Balrog is reaching out to him? I don't know. But the one thing that is clear is that Sauron and the Balrog are certainly not just coinciding threats with no connection to each other. At the very least, we now know that Sauron knows about the Balrog, and that he is going to factor it into his plans. Things are only just starting to go downhill for the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. Among the stores, Nori and Poppy are discovering a whole new reality that stretches their own worldviews. Nori, of course, can't understand why the stores don't run away with the hunters coming back there. That is obviously what the Harfoots would do. But the Gund teaches her about this foreign concept of home, a place where they belong. The great tree outside the Gund's hole shows how their culture is literally rooted in place. The poignant memory of her dead husband lying buried under the tree, waiting for her to be buried beside him, recalls the Harfoot's necessity for leaving their dead behind, only ritually imagining, waiting for them, as they remember those that are lost. This idea of a home is a powerful one, and alien though it is, Nori is clearly moved by it. Given what we learned about the original Harfoot purpose in episode 4, we should not be surprised to see Nori contemplating this concept seriously. Poppy, meanwhile, is putting down roots herself a little differently, establishing a new local connection through her smooch with Merrimack the Stoor. This relationship suggests that Nori and Poppy's connection with the Stoors is likely to be long-lasting. This is not merely a visit. The connection is particularly touching in Poppy's case. Remember that in Season 1, the one thing we know about Poppy, other than her close friendship with Nori, is that she has lost all of her family and has been sort of pseudo-adopted into the Brandyfoot family. It's rather beautiful for Poppy to find a new connection, and potentially her own family and her own roots, though she's not looking for a tree to stand under just yet. Solitary Poppy, finding love with the store called Nobody, seems particularly fitting. She has no family, he has no name, or at least didn't until recently. The oddballs of the Stoors and Harfoots fit together rather beautifully, it would seem. It all points to the larger unity of the hobbits and their destiny. By the way, I can't stop laughing at the fact that the romantic activity in which Poppy and Merrimack are engaged when they start making out is milking the venom out of the fangs of an apparently dead rattlesnake. I officially do not recommend this as a first date activity, but then what do I know? Seems to work. The appearance of another rattlesnake and its fangs on screen, however, officially makes that an important symbol. You will remember that this is the second time that a rattlesnake has appeared with the Harfoots in this season. The first time was when that snake was going to strike them and the hunter killed it just before it could give their hiding spot away by striking them to death. That scene made the symbolism detection hairs on the back of my neck stand up, especially with how it seemed connected to the Galadriel hunter himself. A second rattlesnake seals the deal. I am now 100% sure that that snake is an important symbol. I am not, however, sure what to do with it. With all the Old Testament imagery in this season, more on that later, I am toying with a Garden of Eden thing, especially with the prominent and emotionally significant tree standing nearby that has already been connected with mortality and burial. But tempting as that is, I am not convinced by it yet. I want some more data on this one. I don't feel that I see the snake thing clearly yet. I bet, though, that I am going to understand it better by the end of the season. Keep this in mind as we move forward. Meanwhile, the stranger is still trying to figure out this whole wizarding gig. The initial conversation between the stranger and Tom Bombadil focuses, a little surprisingly, on the secret fire. Later on in the episode, when I do my Tolkien points, I'm going to come back and talk about the secret fire more. It's a really interesting idea in Tolkien's world, and it has a ton of theological freight attached to it. For now, let's focus on what Tom actually says about it. Tom immediately identifies the stranger's vision as the secret fire whispering to him, which it does if we have ears to hear. That language, by the way, about ears to hear, is another Bible quote. He is quoting Jesus, who is quoting the Hebrew prophets. Tom's words suggest that visions and dreams, like the ones that the stranger has been receiving, are divine messages, and that the only thing doubtful about them is our willingness or ability to receive them, or perhaps even to perceive them. He confirms that the visions are certain, not just possible. This, of course, matches our own experience so far in this season. Every brief flash of visionary image that we have seen this season has turned out to be a snippet of future show footage. Having just revealed some pretty high-level hermit mentor instruction to his wizardly pupil, however, Tom Bombadil is immediately disappointed. The stranger starts right away talking about mastering things again. This time, mastering the power of the secret fire itself. His heart, the stranger's heart, does seem like it's in the right place. He wants to master the power in order to fight back against the darkness. This is a great end to shoot for. But stop me if you've heard this before, the means to that end is dreadful. Tom, betraying a little exasperation, makes the implications of the stranger's own words plain, asking him what the secret fire needs with him as a master. The stranger wants to learn to control his power, but he is just not picking up what old Tom is putting down when it comes to being master. Just as an aside, let me say again how much I love it that they chose Tom Bombadil to elaborate this idea of mastery. It is so central to Tom's character as Tolkien describes it. I understand people who object to the idea of Tom Bombadil rambling off to Rhûn, but this theme just makes Tom, to me, perfectly placed. It is so much more important to the story, so much more thoughtful of an engagement with Tolkien's ideas than the mere geography question, in my opinion. Anyway, Tom is fed up, and so he prepares for a final test of the stranger. He says, quite frankly, that the stranger has failed every single test so far, and we have seen that to be true. The stranger wants to assert control, to seize power, to dominate things with power, and the rest of this episode is showing us several other people who are on various stages of that particular downward road. Ar-Pharazôn, Adar, Sauron himself, King Durin, Galadriel. So there will be a last test, and really the last. If he fails this, he's out. Now, pay careful attention to what happens next. The stranger begs Tom to tell him what he must do. Bombadil says, "Follow old Tom, for he will show you." Remember that, because this is going to get tricky. Tom leads him to the Valley of Styx, and then spells out the test. You will find your true staff only when the vision of your heart is single to the service of the secret fire. So, what is the test? What does passing this test look like? The conflict becomes apparent almost immediately. The stranger has just received a vision of the urgent need and danger of his friends, and this hunt for your staff in this valley of infinite deadwood task is going to take months. He can't do them both. Tom immediately leans into this, saying, unless there is somewhere else you wish to be. This construction makes it seem that the conflict between the two options is absolute. Going off to try to rescue his friends is purely alternative to finding his staff. He can't do both. Tom even emphasizes this, saying he cannot return, that there are times when one path becomes two and you must choose. Turn away now and you can never return to this path. Bombadil seems, through his words and his body language alike, to be telegraphing to the stranger that herring off after his friends is what failing the test looks like. That his last and only chance to fulfill his destiny is to stay and buckle down to some serious staff shopping. So, what's the real answer? Is that what passing the test actually looks like? Well, let's see. I think I will leave my friends to die so that I can increase my own power in order to take on evil and save the world. Does that sound like something you'd expect to hear in a Tolkien production? Walking away and going to save his friends is obviously the right thing to do. Now, how can I be so sure? Well, let's start with the book. There is an obvious book parallel that just jumps out at you. Aragorn's decision at Parth Galen in the beginning of the Two Towers. Frodo has gone off to Mordor, alone with his servant, and Merry and Pippin are being orc-dragged down to Rohan. Aragorn is in a bind. What does he do? Does he go to help Frodo, on the success of whose journey the fate of the world depends? Or does he go in the opposite direction, trying vainly to rescue the two comparatively unimportant companions whose rescue would accomplish nothing significant even if he could manage to pull it off? At last, he says, his heart speaks clearly. Obviously, they go after Merry and Pippin. Going to pursue Frodo would mean abandoning Merry and Pippin to torment and death. Aragorn's heart speaks clearly because abandoning his friends to death is obviously wrong. Aragorn does not pursue good ends by morally questionable means. That's why he succeeds. The choice for the stranger is closely parallel, and abandoning Nori and Poppy to torment and death would be wrong. That is simply not what passing the test can possibly look like. But hang on, that's a book thing now. Despite the closeness of the parallel, both involving two hobbits being captured and probably tortured on the one hand against destiny and the fate of the world on the other, can we be confident that the show is pushing us in this same direction? Yeah, we get lots of pointers for that. Why does the stranger believe that his friends need him? Because he saw it in a vision, which Tom immediately explained are clear and certain messages from the secret fire itself. You know, if you have ears to hear the message and don't ignore it to go find a stick to use to increase your own power instead. And there's more. Tom breaks out with, try not to be shocked, a Fellowship of the Ring quotation. When the stranger is talking about saving his friends' lives, Tom quotes, "Many that die deserve life. Some that live deserve death. Who are you to give it to them?" This, of course, is very close to what Gandalf says to Frodo in The Shadow of the Past when they're talking about Gollum. Very close, except almost completely reversed. Frodo is saying that Gollum deserves death, and Gandalf notes that unless you can give life to those who deserve life but die, you should be maybe a little careful about giving out death to those you think deserve it. The point is about the limitation of our judgment, that even the very wise cannot see all ends. And Gandalf's purpose is to teach Frodo about the importance of pity, even pity for those who don't seem to deserve it. Here, Tom Bombadil reverses the order and the application. Is he really saying, "Who are you to give life to those whom you have the power to save"? Is this a trick question? Bombadil has totally inverted the quotation. And what's more, his question has an obvious answer. Who is the stranger to give life to those he could save? Well, the guy whom the secret fire sent messages to saying, "Hey, dude, heads up, your friends are in danger and they totally need you." The hard part of this scene is not understanding what's supposed to happen. It's understanding why Bombadil seems to be pushing the stranger so hard into making the wrong choice. I think the answer is clear. This is the test. Tom is making the terms of the test as clear as possible. He is laying out all the temptation to power and expediency of prioritizing the ends over the means. He gives the stranger the right answer back in his cottage, and then points him in the direction of failure when they get to the cliff, having warned him that this was going to be a test. But remember, he already gave him the answer. The stranger asked, "What am I to do?" And Bombadil answered, "Follow old Tom, for he will show you." And he has. He has been showing him since the stranger turned up. He has been modeling what mastery of magic, what the proper relationship with other living creatures and the world around you looks like, ever since he pulled the stranger out of the tree. He didn't say, "Listen to old Tom." He said to follow him. The stranger is left to choose between his friends and his destiny. But the choice is very clear. We open the episode with Celebrimbor delivering a strikingly Shakespearean monologue to a piece of metal, personifying the rings of men and complaining of their pride and how they resist his hand. It's a really fun moment. It's like, what would Richard II say if he were the Lord of Eregion rather than the King of England? It also gives us a glimpse into Celebrimbor's rather frayed state of mind. Celebrimbor is strained and as burned out as the smoking block of charred metal in his hand. If he is making speeches addressing the metal shards and blaming them for not submitting to him, we shouldn't be shocked when he also speaks rather intemperately to the other smiths also. The Shakespearean monologue hints at his separation, his isolation in his own mind, like the character in a play who steps aside and speaks his own thoughts where only the audience can hear him, detached from the other characters and the action of the play. When he insists, rather lamely, to Annatar that he is well, and that he is absolutely not losing his mind in any way, we can hear a hint of desperation. Celebrimbor is breaking down and he is in denial. Sauron, of course, now has Celebrimbor in the palm of his hand. Annatar has been the architect of Celebrimbor's decay, and he now leans into it and exploits it further. He isolates Celebrimbor, separating him from the other smiths and all but imprisoning Celebrimbor in his tower. He brings Celebrimbor to doubt his own mental stability by gaslighting him in small things. The scene with the hammer is fascinating. When Celebrimbor says that he was sure he put his hammer just there, we see the spot, and there's no hammer there. As soon as Annatar says, "You mean that hammer?" Celebrimbor turns and both he and we, the audience, now see the hammer that was not there in the shot a second ago. This scene tells us something about Sauron's abilities and his methods. It lets us know that he has the ability to create illusions, and also that he is going out of his way to mess with Celebrimbor like this. Celebrimbor's forgetting Myrdania's name is the other major sign of slippage, and it understandably freaks out his longtime faithful assistant. At first it looks like a spontaneous mental slip, but once we see Sauron's disappearing hammer trick, we have good reason to wonder whether this is gaslighting too. Has Sauron actually suppressed Celebrimbor's memory of Myrdania's name? Celebrimbor's immediate recollection and the parallel with the hammer make it seem likely. So to what end does Sauron toy with Celebrimbor's confidence in his own mind? The place we see him pushing Celebrimbor to immediately is the business about retreating into his own mind. Celebrimbor is feeling the strain of going back and forth between his own internal mental world, the world in which he is wrestling with personifications of the rings of men, and the exigencies of the real world around him. Little things like ruling Eregion or being civil to his colleagues. Note the shape of that. Celebrimbor is retreating from the world of the scene around him into his own little unseen realm. And this is just where Sauron wants to keep him, and the end to which all of Annatar's gaslighting tends. Sauron is bringing Celebrimbor into the unseen realm, his unseen realm, alone in the darkness, and there binding him. Another convenient side effect of Celebrimbor's isolation, of course, is Annatar's widening influence in Eregion. He is made the delegate to the dwarves. He is made the functional lord of the city. His influence over the other elves in Eregion is embodied in his relationship with Myrdania, whom he continues to groom with elegant creepiness. The people of Eregion are to be his tools, even against Celebrimbor himself if need be. Watch what happens with Myrdania at the end of the scene where the rune-carved body of the soldier is found. Annatar, expressing his hope that he can trust Myrdania to help him against Celebrimbor, takes her hand, and he does something that is almost off camera with her hand. It looks like he's maybe handed her something, but she never verbally acknowledges it. Seeds are clearly being planted there, and he has the city well in hand. Annatar's big wardrobe change is a visual signal that he has changed gears. No longer white angelic robes, Annatar now wears black armor, though armor suitable for an elf lord. The thick golden band about his waist seems like a clear piece of dramatic irony, foreshadowing the one. Sauron is moving on from the binding people in the darkness stage to the ruling all stage. Sauron is preparing for his Eregion endgame. However, Sauron is under a certain amount of pressure as the episode nears its end. He obviously needs Celebrimbor. The breakthrough in the making of the rings was Celebrimbor's, and Sauron clearly can't make the Nine without him. He just as obviously has laid the groundwork for Adar's invasion, pointing Adar in the direction of Eregion when he was in his camp in Halbrand's form. And he looks with one of his small evil smiles out at the army of the Uruk's children, which Adar has summoned for Sauron's use. The timing, though, is going to be a bit tight. Celebrimbor still has not succeeded in making the Nine yet, and the orcs are already laying siege to the city. The outbreak of violence seems at first to wreck the entire project. Celebrimbor hears the alarm bells and is shaken out of his mental detachment and brought back to the concerns of the seen world. Sauron's attempt to preserve Celebrimbor's sequestering, slamming the shutters closed, seems desperate and hopeless now, and Celebrimbor sees through it easily. He can hear his people's need. This is not something he can be convinced just to tune out. Celebrimbor's violent shove of Anatar seems like a critical turning point, emphasized by his "unhand me, friend," which broadcasts his new conviction that Anatar is not really friendly. Victory seems about to slip from Sauron's grasp, even at the very end. Sauron's big illusion looks like the final act of his manipulation of Celebrimbor. The massive illusion clearly takes a lot out of Sauron. He cuts himself, apparently using his own blood to fuel the magic, just like we saw happening in the Temple of the Dark Wizard out east. Notice, by the way, that he cuts himself even before the conversation with Celebrimbor that ends in the shoving match. The grand illusion is not an improvisation. He knew it was coming, and he planned for it. The big illusion is the ultimate payoff of all the gaslighting. Sauron achieved intermediate goals, isolating Celebrimbor from his supporters, for instance. But they were always focused on achieving his big goal. He knew that he had put an orc army in motion, and as time wore on, in the frustrating Nine Rings process, Sauron knew that every day made it likelier that he would have to create a situation in which Celebrimbor would be ready to continue forging rings while his city literally burned around him. He had to prepare Celebrimbor to doubt his own mind and even his own senses, retreating so far into his own little unseen world that he became oblivious to the scene. When Celebrimbor steps outside into the peace of a sunny day, his imprisonment away from reality is complete. Remember that stuff about retreating into his own mind, and his forging tower has come to increasingly embody that idea of his own mental and creative landscape. With one huge effort and delicious irony, we see Sauron projecting Celebrimbor's internal mental landscape outward onto the city outside the tower. This is Eregion as Celebrimbor imagines it, the sun shining, children playing, and artists of every kind delightedly at work. Celebrimbor has left the tower, but Sauron does not allow him to leave his mind. And in the midst of this fantasy landscape, which is a lie, Anatar emerges from the tower and tells him the exact and complete truth about himself, his purpose, and the Rings of Power. Once again, and on multiple levels, we see double. We hear Sauron speak his truth to Celebrimbor, and we hear his kind and sincere words, knowing the horrible reality that the truth actually points to. But all the time, we know that even the world that we ourselves are seeing on screen at that moment is a lie. And we are imagining the scene of darkness and fear that is finally revealed in the end. The secret fire might reveal the truth of things to come, if you're open to receiving it. In the unseen world, you might see things as they truly are. The deceits of Sauron show you unseen things that are not, and it binds you to see them whether you want to or not. The final revelation of the real seen world under the illusion is like taking off a ring. We emerge from the lying world of sunshine and peace into a reality of shadow and terror and despair. We are brought to a final appreciation of Sauron's plans, his power, and his subtlety. Sauron's evil smile as he strides across the courtyard is chilling. His victory over Celebrimbor is complete, and the orc army, which Adar has so kindly assembled for him, can now do its worst. The sight of Sauron looking out over the besieging army and lifting his arms as if he were summoning the fireballs that crash into the city is like the confirmation of all of Galadriel's worst fears. Sauron's plan is almost complete. When Miriel is preparing to be thrown to the sea monster, Elendil understandably gets a little upset. The closest he gets to losing his cool and cracking under the pressure of the crushing tests of character that he endures in this episode is this first moment when it is made clear that Muriel is going to be sacrificed in his place. "No, take me, he shouts. Muriel reaches out, takes his arm, and interrupts him, saying Namarie. Now, Namarie is the Quenya word that essentially means goodbye or farewell. It's what Galadriel says at the end of her Quenya song in the Fellowship of the Ring, when the Company of the Ring are leaving Lothlorien in their boats, Namarie. So, it's not inappropriate for Muriel to say farewell to Elendil. They do both expect her to die in a minute. But the timing and delivery of the line are exceedingly strange. For one thing, you don't generally start getting the attention of a distraught loved one by saying, "Hey, goodbye." And you also don't usually begin a conversation with goodbye. It's kind of famously the thing you say at the end of what you have to say. Had she solemnly said Namarie to him after their heartfelt discussion, and just before she turned to step into the pool, I wouldn't have thought a thing of it. It would be just a way to say goodbye that would be on brand for the faithful. But that's not what happens. Instead, she starts the conversation with Namarie, using the word to pull Elendil back from his first emotional response. What's going on there? So, the word Namarie is interesting. It is used as a parting word, and farewell is a reasonable encapsulation of it. It contains something like a blessing. Go with goodness, a blessing upon you. Certainly, that sense would work for Muriel, but again, not perfectly. Literally, the word means be well. It's an imperative. Although generally that sounds like a blessing, Muriel seems to give it a different force in this context. It is said at the start of her words to Elendil, like a corrective for his protestations. She will speak of the path of the faithful, which they must tread and down which she must lead. That path, as she explained in the last episode, is not about doing things, such as organizing rebellions against Ar-Pharazôn. It's about being who they should be. Her command to Elendil was to be the calm in the storm. Her command now is Namarie, be well. I am probably going to my death, but you should do a good job of being good, and continuing to walk the path of the faithful, even if the woman you love and to whom you have sworn your fealty is killed. In context, that is what Namarie sounds like it means when Muriel says it. Prince Durin is in a tough place. Disa is correct in her sense of how important it is to resist the king, but she is fierce. As Durin sees, they could end up doing wrong things, failing to Namarie if they're not careful. Starting a civil war, humiliating King Durin, would not be the way. Durin's compassion is an important tempering of her steel. Disa takes this to heart, and the result is something like a reunion between Disa and the mountain. Celebrimbor puts his glorious end of saving the peoples of Middle-earth before everything. His responsibilities as the lord of the city, his relationships with his colleagues, even his own connection with reality are all cast onto the slag heap with the other scraps of spent metal that now litter the floor of his vermin-infested workspace. He is deceived, and in the end, he is taken in by an illusion, but his own desires blind him as well. The lure of not only being the savior of Middle-earth, but being greater than Feanor, and accomplishing more than his famous grandfather ever did, dulls his mind. Namarie, Celebrimbor, in more than one sense. Galadriel. Now, Galadriel, look, I feel horrible for where you are. I do. But you've got to just take some time and work this through a bit. I'm sorry that you again find yourself to blame for the probable success of the enemies that you're setting out to thwart. But look, you fell into this trap every time. Every time! Let's just... Namarie, Galadriel. Maybe you don't dedicate your life to vengeance. Would your brother really want to see you spending millennia guzzling seawater? Maybe if someone offers you the crown of freaking Morgoth as a means to achieve your noble ends, you think 2 or maybe even 3 times about that potential partnership. I really do feel awful for you at the end of the episode, Galadriel, but girl, that has to be the most obviously bad call in the history of moral deliberation. When someone asks you if you want to use the power of Morgoth's crown, you say, no, it's not complicated. The stranger's decision is still up in the air, Yes, he needs to stop the power from raging out of control when he tries to use it, but follow where Tom Bombadil leads and Numenorean. Think about the world from the tree's perspective and treat trees kindly. Hang out with goats, cuddle lambs, maybe listen to messages sent you by the secret fire about how your friends are in danger and need your help. And, Mr. Stranger, I know you haven't read The Fellowship of the Ring yet, but surely even you can see that Tom Bombadil got that quotation completely backwards. Something tells me, though, that you are going to get that line straightened out, and maybe you'll even deliver it correctly someday. All he has to do is Numenorean, be well, do the right thing, and he will pass the test. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Today I am joined by another special guest, Alan Sisto from the Prancing Pony podcast, and of course, one of the co-hosts of the Rings of Power wrap-up with our special guest from last week, James Tauber, and also Sarah Brown, who may be joining us later on. Alan, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Corey. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. So today you're going to join us for some of our Q&A. So we've got questions that we've received from people on our Discord. Yeah. We've got, you might be shocked to find there are people who have questions. So
I am absolutely blown away. I can't believe anybody has any questions at this point. They've revealed everything. What is there to wonder about?
Yes, there's so much. Okay, so let's get straight to the biggest questions. And this is something that I've been really looking forward to discussing in a little more. This is a question people have been asking me for a long time, and I've never really had the chance to sit down and talk about it. So I'm really interested to work through it with you.
All right.
And that is, it's kind of two different questions about the Rings of Power and their making. So comparing the way that Tolkien laid out and talked about the making of the Rings of Power and how the forging of the Rings of Power has been handled on screen. So Greg T was asking, were the 7 and the 9 rings always designed and intended to be for the dwarves and men respectively? So the question is, like, were they all just elven rings made for elves?
You're right. Yeah.
And then later on, Anatar took them and gave them, Sauron took them and gave them away to the dwarves. And was that plan B or was it plan A? How does that work? So that's one question. The other question from Jim Nonanon is the question about the sequencing of the making of the Rings of Power. Right. And of course, this is something I know, Matt, Nerd of the Rings, has talked about this a lot as well. The question of, so in the story as Tolkien wrote it, of course, we have the rings, the 9 are made and the 7 and the 3 are made and the 1 is made last. So in the show, they made the decision to invert it, to do the 3 first and then the 7 and then the 9, very clearly sequentially in that order. And of course, presumably the 1 significantly later after that. So the question is, do you think we've lost something due to change in ring order? And if so, what do you think? Do you think that there's something outweighed by the gain? Let's start with that one.
Okay.
So this is something I think is always a really important question for me when we're thinking about places where the show has decided to make a change, right? Where Tolkien says things are one way and they go in a different direction. A lot of people, I think, have kind of a hard time just getting past the mere difference, right? The mere but that's not what it is in the book, or
but
that's
the
wrong.
elves weren't
or
at
something
Helm's
like
Deep, that kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And it seems to me always the really important question to Alec. You're not doing justice to the adaptation if you don't even ask the question, okay, so what is that story?
Right.
And even in some ways, I think even one doesn't even do full justice to Tolkien if one doesn't stop and think, well, so what is the story that Tolkien is telling? Okay, so this detail is different. So they have altered this fact, right? What was that fact doing? What was Tolkien's story? And let's make sure we understand that before we think it through.
Exactly. And that really is the juxtaposition that you have with these changes. You have to get to the core. I'm going to use Tolkien's words here out of Letter 210, the core of the original, right? I mean, he does acknowledge, Tolkien himself says, look, when somebody's going to make an adaptation, there are going to be changes. Some of these changes are going to be required because of the change in medium, and some are going to be, a problem, shall we say. They're going to miss the core of the original. And so, you have to ask the question first, what was Tolkien trying to express in his textual version of the story, and how is that changed if those elements are mixed up? In the case of the rings, for instance, we do know that Sauron was there and taught them the craft of ring making. We know from Unfinished Tales that, or again, if we accepted that as canonical, that there's a point where it says Sauron himself departed from Eregion about the year 1500 after the Myrmidon had begun the making of the Rings of Power, but not completed them, right? They'd begun making them. So at this point, it's the 9 and the 7. And we know it's not the 3 because the 3 are made after he's gone, right? We read that, I think, in Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, that these were the 3 that had last been made and possessed the greatest powers. So that's how we're able to kind of suss out the fact that Sauron wasn't involved in those 3. He was already gone.
Right.
But how does that change? How does that change the story? Does it? Can the 3 still be the most powerful? Can the 3 still have been made without his influence? Yes. You could still have that be the case. You could say these 3 were made maybe with the highest percentage of mithril. Please don't make me go down the mithril road. Please.
Yeah, we won't even go there.
I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there.
But it's especially since they went pretty far out of their way in episode 1 and 2 of season 2 to bring the debate of did Sauron's hand sully them or not, right? That's it's certainly not something that they're just trying to kind of sweep under the rug. It's a major plot.
The thing is, though, they're making that a
season.
Mystery that it doesn't need to be. It should be 100% clear, absolutely crystal clear that he was not involved. And they keep kind of dancing around it and touching on the fact that, well, maybe he did, Did he really? I mean, he was touching the mithril, and was he involved here? Or he didn't
touch the mithril until the 7 rings. Yeah. But still, I agree. There's the difference of opinion, right, between Elrond and Galadriel, right, about the 3 and about how risky they are. But that's exactly so. Thinking about again, so what is that story? What is the story that they are emphasizing and telling about the 3? One of the things that just jumps, even so, just kind of leaving the sequence aside for a second. One of the things that is so noticeable about their depiction of the 3, and this was noticeable from the trailers, right, on before that we even saw any of the episodes, was that they are leaning into the dodginess of the 3. Right? Yeah. The 3 being, because there are 2 separate questions, right? There's, are the 3 corrupt? That is the power of Sauron laid upon them, right? Which, of course, in the book, Elrond is sort of defensive about that in the Council of Elrond, right? Yeah. That no, you weren't paying attention. Glowing. Yeah.
The 3 have not been touched.
Yeah, they were not touched by Sauron.
3 are perfectly fine, and we don't talk about the 3. The first rule of the 3 is we don't talk about the 3.
We don't talk about the 3, right. But there's the separate question of, okay, maybe they're not corrupted by Sauron, but are they a good idea?
Right. And that's still a question that they can ask, and that's a question that Tolkien asks. I mean,
exactly.
We are meant to work our way through that question of, just because these rings are free of Sauron's influence or Sauron's corruption, does that necessarily mean that they're good? Because all they do is enhance the elves' typical tendency towards fainéant melancholy, as Tolkien called it, I think in letter 208. This sort of this desire to, there's another letter where he talks about, imagine somebody reading a book and they just keep staying in the same chapter over and over again. These ideas of sort of embalming, I think, is another word that he uses. I mean, it's very clear that the 3 are good in the sense that they're not evil, but they're not really wise to have done these things. These are things that should have been destroyed. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that, I think, is, and to go back to a point that you were hinting at before about how these ideas grew in Tolkien's mind, right? The concept of the 3 gets put out there in The Lord of the Rings. And like so many of the things in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien is discovering these things as he goes and knows almost nothing about the 3 rings during the course of the writing of The Lord of the Rings.
True.
But so it's interesting to see that is to me one of the really fascinating functions of those later writings, like of the Rings of Power in the Third Age and Unfinished Tales.
Yes.
As he goes on and continues to think about these things, what questions begin to arise in his mind and in the letters too. And yeah, you can see, like, the more time goes on, the more Tolkien kind of realizes or thinks through, the three were a bad plan. Like, it was the motivation to, like, they weren't evil, as you say, they weren't corrupt, but they are the expression of what is fundamentally a wrong impulse by the elves. Yeah. It's like they're one of their worst tendencies.
To preserve unchanged these places and these times is not a good impulse. It's an understandable impulse. It's based on who the elves are as being serially longeval creatures, but it is not a good impulse to follow. And I think that's something we can see. Yeah.
It's not wicked, but it's not great. Yeah.
It's not natural.
So anyway, thinking about the two parallel stories, the emphasis, as you pointed out, with the book order is about ascending power, right?
It describes ascending power and descending influence of Sauron. It's sort of there's two arcs going on at a time. One is going up and one is going down. The influence of Sauron. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that the pinnacle of the elf ring making process are both the strongest and the purest of all of the rings of power. And so that therefore the preparation process, right, like the apprenticeship, the dodgy apprenticeship with Sauron process, right, that went at the beginning, is something in a sense that Celebrimbor sort of emerges from, right? And almost in a sense repurposes. You know, like he sort of achieves something beyond Sauron's manipulation. Now, of course, then Sauron's further action to sort of trump that by making the One Ring, right, which would then circle back and undo Celebrimbor's work, is then sort of the next step.
Right.
So that's that story trajectory is, and there are other things we could say about it, but that I think is a fairly good capturing of the basic story of the rings. Now, by contrast, what's the story of the sequence that we get in the show, right? Yeah. And especially as season 2 has gone along, we could see hints of this already earlier on. But I mean, as season 2 has gone along, it's really clear that the primary story they want to tell is the story of increasing corruption, right?
Right.
Moving the three to the beginning so that we start with the best and purest of the rings, and then the long downward spiral that Celebrimbor is going through is then sort of matched by the downward decline,
the level of corruption in the rings,
of the rings.
Because clearly the 7 are more corrupted than the 7, and the 9 are going to be even more corrupted than the 7.
Than the 7, yeah.
But that
exactly,
and I think that actually is where I have more of an issue, or more of a concern as far as the core of the original goes. It has to do with the fact that while the 3 are still, relatively pure in that sense, as pure as they can be, as pure as Rings of Power are allowed to be.
Right.
The fact that the 9 are going to be different than the 7, and I know I don't want to say, well, it's different, therefore it's bad.
Right.
Does concern me a little bit, because, see, the original purpose of the rings, all of them, was for Sauron to essentially enslave the elves. He was going to use the one to control all 16, or all 19 for that matter. He didn't know about the 3, but they were going to be subject to the one. And in fact, in Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, we actually read that Sauron guided their labors, talking about the Gwaith Myrddin, the unnamed smiths. That's apparently the union that the smiths make later. That's my spin on it.
Right.
Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance. Yes. So the plan all along was for him to get them to make these rings, and then he was going to make a master ring that would control all of them. And the fact that they then made 3 that were better and free of his influence, and therefore not able to be controlled, perceived, yes, because when he put on the 1, he could see their thoughts.
Yes.
But that left the 16. So then he comes back and he goes, well, I'm clearly not going to be able to control the elves. Let me take these rings, give them to dwarves and men.
Plan B. Yeah.
But those 16 are identical in the sense of power and corruption. They took place at the same point on that curve of Sauron's influence and on the curve of power building. So to think that the 9 are more powerful or are more corrupt than the 7, it weakens the argument that men are simply more corruptible. The whole reason why the 9 are more effective than the 7 isn't because the 9 are more powerful rings. It's because men have them, not because dwarves have them.
Right.
And I think
that,
does,
of course,
has part of the story a little bit.
Right. But that clearly has been what Celebrimbor in the show has been voicing again and again.
Yeah.
Right. That's been his explicit concern. Not that they're going to be more subject to the rings or that the rings are going to corrupt them, but that they're men. And therefore, they're going to give them
power. But they're clearly headed that direction with the rings. Like these rings will be more, right? I mean, we saw that already with Mirdanya disappearing and seeing Sauron as he is in the unseen world and all of that. So, which I also have issues with. We're going to gloss over that. We're going to hand wave that away.
That's a different question. Yeah. There's.
But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. You're right. Does this change the story of the rings? Does this change what Tolkien intended for us as readers to take away from the story of the rings in the sense of power bad, corruption bad, even preservation not great.
Right. And
if those are the core of the original, then those are still there. The question is how much more is considered to be core of the original. That's such a subjective question. Thanks, Professor, for telling us that we need to make sure we stay near the core of the original and then never telling us what the core of the original actually is.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And through your own later contemplations, kind of shifting the center in some ways, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And this is, of course,
only
yet
later
another
does he realize he's writing a story about death.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But this is yet another place, I think, where later on in Tolkien's reflections on this, and not just on the Rings of Power, but one of those later things that we see Tolkien doing in his storytelling in the last decade or decade and a half of his life is calling into question a thing that he rarely called into question in the first half to 2/3 of his literary career. And that's the blatant elf-centric nature of all of the storytelling. These stories emerged in Tolkien's imagination as elf stories, right? They were always stories handed to humans by the elves, but this is the elves' story of themselves. Anyway, so this is all coming back around to the original, the elf-centric version of the Rings of Power that you were reading from, the one that's in the Silmarillion, right? The one that's in Of the Rings of Power. And
or even the one in Unfinished Tales. It's the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, that the Rings of Power was always all about the elves, right? Yeah. And of course, so one sort of not counter to that exactly, but like another perspective on that, right, would be, according to the elves, yes, this was the whole story. Like that was Sauron's that's all he cared about all along, right? But I think there's evidence, even if we think about the significance of the fact that he later on said that Durin's ring was given to him personally by Celebrimbor instead of by Sauron, right? Yeah. There's like that he holds open that possibility. The dwarves say that,
right? The dwarves.
Yeah, the dwarves say that, right? Yeah, exactly. And if the dwarves say that, should that be true, it suggests that the other version of the story may not be, in fact, that there was at least one ring that was in fact intended for dwarves, and may perhaps even therefore have been made with the dwarves in mind. Anyway, so my point is only, I think that we can see this as part of a pattern of things that Tolkien is thinking about more later in his life. And again, it strikes me as entirely typical of this show to be like, okay,
let's make this more complicated than it needs to be.
Let's put that right out there, right? Let's just and because that's one of the trends I think that we can see is that whatever else you say about it, the making of the rings, as Annatar and Celebrimbor discuss it, is not a wholly elf-centric exercise. He is focused on the dominion of all Middle Earth, and that's the focus. And in some ways, I think that this is it partakes of a kind of Tolkien's later interest in sort of diversifying opinion, like what did the dwarves say and what did the humans say about this? Yeah. At the same time, there's also a sense in which it goes back to the beginning. What is the beginning? The verse, surely, the poem, is pretty close to the beginning, right? Before he even worked out the things in Unfinished Tales and Other Rings of Power in the Third Age, we get the poem, right? And the poem itself surely implies 3 rings for the Elven Kings, 7 for the Dwarf Lords. Whoever wrote that poem seems to be under the impression that the rings were intended to ensnare all 3 of the races, and that these rings were intended for that purpose.
That's really a challenge, because how are the 3 intended to snare the elves when Sauron wasn't involved in their making?
Well, right, agreed. The point is not that the early lines suggest the ensnarement. It's the One Ring that's designed for ensnarement.
Yes,
right?
And that's fair, because that's exactly what Sauron intended to do with the 1.
Exactly.
Even though he didn't know about the 3 being more powerful, being free of his influence, he did still have power, not over their actions, but he could at least see what was going on with those rings. So they shut him off, basically.
Right. Anyway, it's a complicated question.
It is,
but
it is.
It's something I think that really. It requires, it's not as simple a question, I think, as it seems at first.
No, and I think, honestly, answering it now is almost premature. Like, we need to see what effect the 9 have in the television version, and why that effect is present before we can speak to, whether there's been a change as a result of this particular modification of the story. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I assume, given that we're through episode 6 and the 9 haven't even been forged yet, that the main story of the Nazgul and the use of the rings and what the impact of the 9 rings are is going to be a major season 3 plot line.
All I'm thinking of, though, is the text about that it is said that 3 of the ones ensnared were great lords of Numenor. And right behind Pharazôn are 3 people that could be High Lords of Numenor. I have a feeling we're looking at Kemen and Beltazar, I think his name is, and Eärien. I have to say, the idea of a female ring wraith, I like it. I'm sensing a little Princess Leia moment, though. Aren't you a little short for a Nazgul? Needs to be trending.
Yeah, I am an OG member of the Eärien is a Nazgul club. Like that's
are you? I've specifically avoided watching your show so that I don't end up like parroting your spins or takes. I'm like, I'll watch it when the show's done. Eärien.
I hear that.
Kemen, I stumbled on Kemen because last week I thought no death is sufficient for Kemen, and then I realized exactly that.
Exactly.
No death.
Yeah.
Would be sufficient for Kemen.
Would be sufficient. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. A really fun game to play is to imagine which Nazgul they are, right? Like, was it Kemen, who was like standing outside Crick Hollow for hours waiting to try to attack Fatty Bulger? Like, come on, you can't say that's not fun.
And now I'm picturing Kemen as a Nazgul, but with his arm still in a sling.
Right, yeah, exactly. And getting the door slammed in his face by Gaffer Gamgee. Yeah. Come on, right?
Yeah. That's got to be him.
It's got to be him.
Got to be him. Good stuff.
Yeah. Awesome.
Good stuff.
So one last really quick question. And this is from I Ain't No Hero on our Discord.
Okay.
It's a question. I've seen a lot of people talking about this, and that is there are a lot of people who are speculating that Mirdania, Celebrimbor's assistant, whose name we can occasionally remember, is actually Galadriel's daughter.
Yeah, we bandied that idea around a little bit last week as well, just because of the way that was so put forward by the lines
you remind
that
me of
Anatar
Galadriel
spoke.
moment. Yeah.
But there's just no. I would be willing to bet a pretty significant amount of money it's not actually Celebrimbor. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And in particular, I think the way that I part ways with that reading really at the start, because he's not just saying, "Gosh, you kind of remind me of God. You kind of look like your mom." Like that. No, it is a sexual advance on Anatar's side.
Yeah.
And it is received as such. Right? She's not like, "Oh, thanks. You think I look like mom?" No, this is "Oh, you think I'm as hot as Galadriel? I'm quite pleased to hear you say that." Like, I mean, it's...
Yeah, I was going to say she should report it to HR, but I don't think she's going to report it to HR.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be trending in that direction. Yeah,
no, it does not.
Yeah. No, so I think it's the whole interview. I mean, it does. The fact that he brings up Galadriel as a standard of comparison tells us several things, right? It tells us that... And her response to that shows that, like, Galadriel is accepted
she doesn't
as
say who.
Yeah,
she
exactly.
Say, "Oh, that hag." I mean,
exactly.
Is like,
she is all over pleased by that comparison, right? Yeah, exactly. So, but it also does kind of suggest that he's not over her, Galadriel. I mean,
no, I don't think he is.
Yeah,
he's clearly not over her. And would you be?
Right. Well, look. I understand. Yeah. No, but it is interesting because it's the one, we've gotten a lot of emphasis during season 2 on Galadriel's continued like obsession and trying to work through stuff. And that's like the one little glimpse we've gotten to the fact that like Sauron also is still kind of hung up, right? Yeah. This is not necessarily just a question of like Galadriel might not for him be just another mark. Anyway, but that at least I wasn't even considering that, but I was assuming that in some sense she was just another mark, or at least, one of particular usefulness in his. Yeah,
I was going to say it's sort of like aiming high. She's still a mark. Right. She's still absolutely a mark, but she's like the best mark he could aim for.
Exactly. She's a great mark, but still a mark. Yeah. And that was the one moment where I was like, Sauron, like, tell me more about this fixation of yours on Galadriel. So anyway, I don't know, maybe not, but it at least hinted at that possibility. So
yeah, I think it would also be, just from a storyline perspective, really, really, really odd to be introducing Celebrimbor before we finally
get Celeborn.
If we ever get to Celeborn.
I'm sure it'll happen. In season 3, probably.
Well, I hope that Adar introduces him to her so that we get his opinion in. That's really what I'm hoping for.
Oh man. I mean, look, Galadriel has a high enough therapy bill already. Like, if Adar pulls that rabbit out of the hat, like, it's curtains. Like, forget it. Yeah. Like, man. Yeah.
Therapy jar isn't big enough. She can put all the quarters in there.
No, it's just not. It's just not. I think so. That my theory is that in season 3, Celeborn is going to turn out to be her therapist. In fact, so that's how it's going to.
She'll be on a chaise lounge in some beautiful Elvish office and say, our time here is done. I'm sorry, we'll see you next week. And then you see on his desk, from the office of Celeborn.
Exactly. Yeah. No, then he'll step out from behind a screen or something at some point. But anyway, I think that's probably
that's great.
It's probably just where we're headed there. But no, I honestly understand why people are looking for Celebrimbor. Like, I get it, especially since nobody wants. Like, everybody wants to imagine that Celebrimbor's already born because nobody wants the scene where Elrond holds in his arms his infant future wife. Like, nobody wants any part of that scene. And I get it. Like, I get it.
Yeah. And also nobody wants the scene in which Elrond holds his future mother-in-law.
No.
And yet anyway.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So,
We'll see about that, won't we?
we will see about that. But yeah. So, however, I don't see any reason from within the show. I don't see any reason to believe that Celebrimbor is alive.
It complicates things significantly.
Very significantly. And there is no reason for them to do anything romantic with Elrond yet.
No.
I mean, the Third Age is a long time. Like Celebrimbor can be born at the beginning of the Third Age and have plenty of time to grow up and bear children who will still be ancient by the time Aragorn falls in love with one of them, right? So, it's fine. There's time for all that. But yeah, I don't. So I will count me among the ranks of people who will be surprised if we ever see an adult Celebrimbor in this show, seasons 1 through 5. But yeah.
Okay.
But I certainly don't think
I can buy that. Yeah.
That she's in Eregion. Got to think that would have come up, or some hint of it
I think so.
already.
I agree.
Other than just her being groomed creepily by Anatar. Anyway.
Red flags, man. The guy's got he's a walking red flag. Please, just don't get near him. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's pretty bad. Well, Alan, thank you so much. That was a really fun discussion. Appreciate your time. Looking forward to more discussions as we move forward and to having you out here for our retrospective episode.
I am really looking forward to that, and I'll see you in a month.
Very good. Thanks, Alan.
All right, take care.
When Adar pulls the unexpected murder weapon out of the box, did anybody else get Adar in the throne room with the Iron Crown? He creates a bit of a sensation. Galadriel recognizes it right away and leans away from it. Then she says, "I was told," and Adar interrupts her, before she can trespass on HarperCollins' text copyright, saying, "There are many stories of what happened." The veiled reference here is to the Silmarillion, of course, in which we are told that when Morgoth was overthrown, the Silmarils are taken from Morgoth's iron crown, and it was beaten into a collar for his neck by which he was chained. I've always loved the fitness of that symbolism. It's beautiful and very satisfying. According to Adar, however, that is just one of the stories of what happened, but not the true one. The implicit reminder that Adar's words should provide to us as viewers of the show, and as readers of Tolkien, is that not everything written in Tolkien's books can be taken to be objectively true. Tolkien loved frame stories, the story of how an old story came at first to be written and then transmitted over time to us, the audience. The existence of frame stories, however, gives the show the license, or at least the show certainly takes the license, to say that some of the things stated in the text are simply not how it really happened. This is explicitly one of those times. The show is often not simply changing Tolkien, they're engaging with the framing concepts into which Tolkien has set his stories. The pattern of corruption in King Durin follows the pattern described in Appendix A when it discusses the side effects of the Seven, as I discussed in the last episode. This week, however, King Durin added a new wrinkle: war profiteering. All Middle-earth is going to war. And this is brilliant for the dwarves, because they will make a fortune on this. The army that goes to war with mithril weapons and armor will be all but invincible. They can name their price. Notice that he gives no hint which side in the war he means to sell to. Now, this is not really an innovation because it's another manifestation of the greed that has been increasingly consuming King Durin, but I find it a very interesting note for a historical reason. Dwarves have a bit of a checkered history in Tolkien's stories. In Tolkien's oldest stories, dwarves are in the same category as orcs and trolls. They're one of the peoples of Morgoth. In a later draft, Tolkien changed his mind about that and made the dwarves more neutral. They're not good guys, they're not even craftsmen, they're merchants, and war profiteering was something they were noted for. They definitely sold arms and armor to both sides in the wars of elves and orcs and got rich off it, not caring who won. Now, later, especially after he wrote The Hobbit, Tolkien began to revise his concept of dwarves again, and he made them one of the free peoples of Middle-earth. By the time we get to Gimli in The Lord of the Rings, the dwarves are good guys, although occasionally problematic ones. It fascinated me to see that in episode 6, as we're watching King Durin become more corrupt, we're actually watching him regress or devolve back down Tolkien's literary development of the dwarf concept. So, why is there a statue of Feanor holding a Silmaril in the courtyard outside Celebrimbor's Tower Forge? I think when people ask this question, they mean, why would any self-respecting elf make a public statue to the memory of Feanor when his selfishness and his murderous and ruthless oath wrought havoc across the length and breadth of Middle-earth in the First Age? Well, there are two things to remember here. First, Celebrimbor is Feanor's grandson. He separated himself from his father, Curufin, son of Feanor, when Curufin was already showing signs of being almost as big a piece of work as Feanor himself. Celebrimbor has renounced the family vices, but he's still in the family and does not shrink from the heritage, mostly because of the second thing to remember. Feanor is known as the greatest of all craftsmen ever. In a city full of elves dedicated to art and craftsmanship, Feanor's greatness will be remembered, and he will be respected, especially by Celebrimbor, his grandson. Feanor was a colossal jerk, but the elves of Eregion are going to remember his skill and artistry, and they're not just going to cancel him. For me, that tracks. Another simple point about the role of the statue in the story of Season 2. It's important to have the huge statue of Feanor looming over the entrance to Celebrimbor's forge. Celebrimbor should always be standing in the literal shadow of Feanor when he comes out of his forge. His dialogue has made this clear from his first lines back in Season 1, that Feanor's genius as an artificer was both his inspiration and his rival. It's right that the figure of Feanor, his face turned away from the elves on the ground under his feet, gazes with rapt attention and desire at his own work, the Silmaril. You might think that the statue could have served to Celebrimbor for a cautionary tale. Here is another of those questions I've been asked 100 times since I started Tolkien professoring. Hey, when Gandalf says on the Bridge of Khazad-dûm that he is a servant of the secret fire, what does that mean? What's he talking about? Once again, the showrunners of the Rings of Power have spotted an uncertain reference in the text and gone right after it like a duck on a June bug. Gandalf's reference in the Fellowship of the Ring to his being a servant of the secret fire is pounced on and given a very prominent role in this episode. So let's talk about this a bit. But I warn you in advance that this is a complicated topic and I'm not really going to be able to do it full justice here. And now let me do another disclaimer. I think that in order to understand in full what Tolkien is thinking about with the secret fire, we would have to work through a ton of Christian theology first, so that we could establish the vocabulary that we would need. And there's no time to go through the doctrine of the Trinity, the concept of the Incarnation, the ontological significance of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, and the first chapter of the Gospel of John. I know that some of you would enjoy that discussion, but I can't turn this into Christian Theology 101. Come to one of our Signum Moots sometime, and then let's sit down at dinner afterwards with a beer and talk about it. I'd like that. Okay, so the Silmarillion speaks of the flame imperishable, which is with Iluvatar, which is what the elves call the monotheistic god of Tolkien's world. The flame imperishable is associated with Iluvatar's power of creation. When he makes the Ainur, the spiritual beings who are the offspring of his thought, he says he kindled them with the flame imperishable. When he creates Ea, the universe, and makes it be, he sends the flame imperishable into the void to be at the heart of the world. I believe that the flame imperishable and the secret fire are the same thing. For in the same way, the Silmarillion describes the remaking of Arda at the end of days and says that Iluvatar will make it by giving it the secret fire. The same creative act, same fire, basically. My own theory is that once the flame imperishable is sent forth from Iluvatar and placed at the heart of the world, it comes to be called the secret fire. Secret because it's now, in a sense, hidden within the world. The secret fire is, in a sense, Iluvatar himself, his power which creates and sustains the world. Still with me? Okay. Guess what was happening right before the flame was placed at the heart of the world to make it be? A vision. Iluvatar granted to the Ainur, the angelic host, a vision of the history of the world. But that vision was fragmentary and incomplete. Then he sends the secret fire, and the vision is made into reality, and the history of the world, foreseen in the partial and fragmentary vision, is made real. So, to sum up, the secret fire is Iluvatar's presence within his creation, and it is associated with visions of history and the future, which it forms into reality through its creative power. Okay, so when Gandalf identifies himself as a servant of the secret fire in the Fellowship of the Ring, he is identifying himself in a spectacularly obscure way as an agent or servant of Iluvatar, of God himself. It makes sense that he addresses the Balrog this way. The Balrog is a demon of fire, and Gandalf essentially says, "Hey, loser, I am not so impressed. Let's compare fire resumes, shall we? I'm a servant of the creative fire of the Lord God Almighty. What do you got again? Oh yeah, a whole lot of dark and shadowy nothing. That's what I thought." Gandalf is declaring his own identity, but he is doing so in a way that is very much designed to be smack talk against the scary demon who's about to get all up in his face. This is the secret fire that Tom Bombadil and the stranger are discussing in this episode, and this is why Tom is borderline scandalized when the stranger starts talking about mastering the power of the secret fire. His comment about the secret fire, Tom's comment about the secret fire not needing him for a master, is a massive, mountainous understatement. What the stranger said borders on blasphemy. Tom can't even stay sitting down to listen to it. He fidgets and starts walking around. It's at this point that Tom starts talking about failed tests and last chances. The stranger really needs to understand who the boss is and how this mastery thing is supposed to work. The talk about the secret fire raises the stakes tremendously. Okay, last note. I bet that most of you are listening to this and saying to yourself, "Hey, is it just me, or is Corey actually admitting that the stranger is Gandalf?" Let's talk about that a little. Look, of course the stranger's name is going to turn out to be Gandalf. Season 2 has made that perfectly transparent. They're not even attempting mystery about this. So why haven't I been talking about this? Because what I see is people getting way too easily distracted. What I am interested in are the stories that the show is inviting us to see and to think about. As an English professor, when I was grading papers, my favorite thing to write in the margins of student essays was, "So what?" Students most of the time would make observations about something that happens in a book, but they wouldn't stop to think it through, to show what is the story that important observation points to. You have to put the observations together to perceive the themes the book is developing, the story that it's putting before us. This is, of course, what I'm trying to do here on Rings and Realms. Now, what I find is that people keep being satisfied with really superficial analysis of the story. A mere identification is a conclusion, but it's a shallow one. I hated the whole "who is Sauron" thing last season because it encouraged this kind of thinking and actually got in the way of a lot of people really thinking about the story. That's the risk of mystery elements. It gives the impression that once you've solved it, you're done. But you're not done. You're only now ready to begin. So what? What story does that observation point to? Back to the stranger. Remember that in season 1, I said that people who were trying to maintain that the stranger was Sauron were missing the point. There was a really interesting story that season 1 was telling about the stranger. It was that he was a wizard, and the whole season told a really cool and creative story that answers the question, so how does the incarnation of the Astari work? What's that like? And the people who were jumping up and down saying, "He's Sauron" or "He's Gandalf," were missing that story, which was a shame. Now in season 2, what are we seeing? What's the story? First and foremost, we are getting the story of the Blue Wizards. Having established the stranger as a wizard and brought him through the awkward early stages of his incarnation, the show is now giving his story a new shape, which it overlays on top of the first one, the Blue Wizard story. 2 wizards in the east, one of which has started an evil magic cult, and the other who seeks to stand against his peer and prevent him from aiding the growth of Sauron's power. That's the Blue Wizard story, and we're getting it. Remember how I said years ago that if he turned out to be Gandalf, it wouldn't change anything? This is just what I meant. That just adds a third overlay. You'll also remember that I've always said that I hope they don't do the Gandalf thing. A primary reason for this was always that I thought it was just too much. I was totally content with Incarnated Wizard overlaid by and segueing to the Blue Wizard story. We got that. And I've loved it, and I was content, and I thought Gandalf's story on top might be a little too much. But with increasing insistence throughout Season 2, the show has made it perfectly clear that there is a third overlay, in fact, that they are placing on top and bringing more into focus, Gandalf's origin story. I should say, if I thought this show would be daunted by additional layers of complexity, more fool me. When has that ever been a barrier? Anyway, I have been putting off talking about this because, as you can see, what I've been doing and why takes a lot of explaining. And now that I've done that, I'll be focusing more on this third layer. But we'll try not to lose sight of the other stories either, the Blue Wizard story and the Wizard Incarnate story. If they're gonna tackle all this at once, so can we.
Dutch angles, choices, and chickens, oh my. There was so much to cover this week, and it's only gonna get more epic in the coming weeks. Please subscribe if you haven't yet done so. Feel free to pledge to us at Rings and Realms on Kickstarter, and you can still reap some of the beautiful benefits and help us create this fantastic show.
Thanks again to Alan Sisto from the Prancing Pony podcast and the Rings of Power wrap-up for joining us today. We love hearing from the brilliant voices in our Tolkien community.
We look forward to Kristen Cairns from Torn.net, Sarah Brown from the Rings of Power wrap-up in the coming weeks, and Matt from Nerd of the Rings at the retrospective. It's gonna be a party!
Yeah, I was thinking we need to welcome them with stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I've been working on something.
Oh,
right?
God.
So
Oh, God.
What do you think? What
Oh!
no?
Just keep practicing, buddy.
I'll work
practicing.
I'll work on it.